Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Presenting today is Janie, and she's going to be talking about tips to prepare for an in-person job interview. So hi, Janie. Thank you so much for coming on board today.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
So before I let Jenny take over and tell us all about how to prepare for an interview, on the next slide, I just want to let everyone know that, so Jenny, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Just want everyone to know that you are all on listen only mode and we will not be able to hear you, but Janie will take questions towards the end of the webinar, of the presentation. For that, please type your questions into the Q&A tab. We will not be taking questions in the chat, and keep your questions nice and short so we can go through as many as possible, because I think there's a lot of you registered for this webinar today, so we're really excited. And if you're using your laptop or desktop computer, that's great, easy to function, but if you're using mobile devices such as cell phones or tablets, you will probably not get the full effect of the webinar. So please download the Zoom app as that's best suggested. So on the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about ACCES. We've been around for over 30 years helping job seekers such as yourselves. We work with several employers and we've got over 30 tailored programs, which include our sector-specific bridging programs. We've got programs for women, leadership, entrepreneurship, youth. So check out our website to find out what would best suit you. We've got 6 locations in the GTA with our new 7th location opening up in Newmarket. And I always like to say that our 8th location is online. And right now we are all working from that online location. So all our services are now transferred to being online. And I'll tell you more about it after Jenny's presentation. So Jenny, I'm gonna hand it over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Sonia. Hi everyone, my name is Janie, and I'm very glad to have you taking the time to join us today for some tips to prepare for your next in-person interview. A little bit about myself. I am a senior financial planning analyst at Mattamy Home, and I also dedicate some of my spare time volunteering as a mentor with Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council to help newcomers landing their first Canadian job. Very happy today to share with you some of my personal interview tips. We will get into our sorry, I will. Today's agenda, we will first go through the question of when should we start preparing for an in-person interview. If you have already landed an interview, congratulations. The time could be slightly tighter, but I'm confident that we could still go through all the preparation before your interview. The first important thing here is to confirm time, location, and transportation method, as well as conduct necessary research. We would then look at how to approach the job description and fill the gap between your personal experience versus what the company is looking for. There will be some tips to prepare for general, behavioral, and creative questions. Last but definitely not the least, how important is it to prepare for questions to ask the hiring parties? In the very end, we will have some time to go through questions, as Sonia mentioned, regarding for today's topic. Before we start today's material, let's play a little game called Pretend I Am the Hiring Manager. Obviously, you won't be able to see me, but imagine putting yourself into interview mode and answer this question. So on your resume, maybe you don't have your resume right beside you, but imagine on your resume, under the most recent work experience, please tell me a little bit about your most recent work experience, the second bullet point under that work experience on your resume. Imagine I am the hiring manager. I'm asking you that questions. Tell me a little bit about your second bullet point on your resume about your recent work experience. Do you remember what you wrote under the second bullet point? Are you prepared to speak to that experience? Is there any story behind what you wrote here? Or is it simply describing your daily duties at your last job? Would describing the story make you a better candidate for the position? Well, answering those questions essentially led us to our first topic today, which is if you're looking for a job, when should you start preparing for your interview? I would argue the answer is at the resume stage, when you start to draw down your qualifications and your past work experience. So resume should serve as a short summary and an introduction that increase readers' interest on you as a potential candidate. So when creating the resume, think about what story would you tell behind each of the bullet point you put it down. Or try not to just describe what you do as a daily job duty, but describe what system, applications, tool did you learn to use, and how did you effectively use them? What initiatives did you start? Were you a leader of any form, even if you are leader in leading a project? And were you actively seeking to improve process and procedures? What values did you bring to your previous employers? And were you being recognized for any work you have done? Make sure you summarize each bullet point as if you're ready to tell a story, and don't be afraid to quantify your achievements, because numbers gives more clarity and increase your trustworthiness in terms of how believable your stories are. So the story could combine several aspects together. For example, in one bullet point on your resume, you could explain the skills you have used to improve procedures and achieve certain goals that was recognized by upper management. That could be a good summary on your resume that may attract hiring parties' attention. And when they look at the resume, they would like to hear more from you. And when you bring that resume into the interview, naturally, it would just be serving as a good talking point. So with a good resume in front of the hiring managers, I would not be surprised if they just want to go through the resume line by line with you and ask you to share a little bit more on every bullet point that was listed on the resume. So that could be a great talking point for you, assuming you have prepared to speak to each of your experience listed on the resume. But if you have already landed an in-person interview opportunity, congratulations. And don't panic if you didn't start preparing at the resume stage. You may have tighter deadline now. For sometimes the hiring party may want you to have this interview in 1 day, 2 days, or maybe a little bit longer, but tighter deadline to prepare. But we could still ace the interview with helps from the following tips. The first thing you may want to do is definitely to confirm the location and the timing of the meeting with the hiring party. My general suggestion is just don't be late, because being late is really not a good first impression. You could do homework to plan your trip there, plan the transportation method. For example, are you taking your personal car? Are you taking public transit? How are you getting there? And make sure you estimate your arrival time so you are not late. Factoring the risk of traffic in your arrival time calculation, and be there early if necessary. So if you're there early, you could find a coffee shop or sit in your car. Make sure you have a proper way to preserve your interview dress or suit so they don't get coffee stain or wrinkles. It is not recommended actually to be showing up at the front desk earlier than 5 or to 10 minutes, even though you're very early there, but you sit in a car, you sit in a coffee shop, but don't show up at the front desk too early, because interviewers would know when you show up at the front desk, and that may put interviewers at edge, knowing you're there so early, and then they're at the back of their mind, they're always thinking about you, which would not be a good first impression either. So if you're really going to be late, for example, due to an emergency car breakdown, call as soon as possible and ask if you could reschedule. And if you're sick, please always call to reschedule, because that's just the proper way to do things. Talking about dress code, I believe it has changed in the recent years. Even though if you're looking for banking industry related jobs, I would definitely still recommend business formal, which is full suit, tie, and shiny shoes. However, as now we have industries and companies that are less formal. I am talking about some tech companies that have casual daily dress code. You may be able to dress down a little bit to fit into the culture. The importance here is really to know your audience and dress accordingly. So the next step is to carefully read the job description. The job description is most of the time being properly thought out by the hiring parties. So hopefully when hiring managers hire, they're looking for someone that's only 60 to 70% of job description fit, rather than someone who knows basic 100% of the job and 100% meets the job description. Most hiring parties understand that if the candidate have the similar background, skill sets, and culture fit, they will be able to learn quickly and adapt on the job. The tips here is to read through the job description as well as your resume and see what you have that fits the job description's requirements, and think about if you have work experience with similar industries. Do you know what systems that they are talking about in the job description? If you haven't used a system before, have you used anything similar before? And think about how you should say to bridge the gap between the system they're using and are looking for versus the system you have used before and you have learned before. Demonstrate your ability to learn and give them examples of your learning new tasks, systems, or tools before is the key to bridge the gap here. Also, if they're looking for certifications, degrees that you don't have, think about if you have anything similar. For example, the studies you have done using your own time that initialized by yourself because you're interested or you think you would actually improve your chance of being a better candidate, or if you're on your way to start a professional program in the field, make sure you're truthful and always be honest. Show them the effort and initiatives that you're taking. It is likely that on the job description, it will talk a little bit about the hiring company itself, for example, in the beginning or in the very end. This is a good starting point to start your research phase. So during the research phase, it is recommended to find out who will be interviewing you. Will there be human resource personnel, department managers, and your potential peers? You could find out information at the previous stage of the hiring process. Well, LinkedIn is a very helpful tool when searching for professional information, especially when you know the person's names and the company name. You could also try Google and any other method to find out if you have any connection that could use as a speaking point and makes a connection between you and the potential employers, or any connection you have with the position being hired. You can seek out to ask around anyone that have worked in the company before, who have worked on a similar position before, and how is the company like, and how is the position look like. Anything you could find could help you gain understanding of the job and potential position. So same logic applies to research on the company. You can first try to Google the company website. If the company is public, then it would likely have a lot of information being published online. Search for related news, social media posts, any relevant information that you are interested in and would later be used as questions that you could ask the company. So after the basic search, let's look at some tips to prepare for questions. It depends on who interviews you, be it human resource manager, department managers, or peers that would potentially work with you. The focus questions could be different. For example, assume human resource for a larger company may not ask too many questions related to technical skills, as their focus and their job would be more to make sure that you truthfully meet the qualifications specified by the hiring manager and your personality will fit in the team. So they would screen you to make sure you have the soft skills, for example, communications, listening skills, interpersonal skills. However, it is not to say that hiring human resource personnel would not ask you technical related questions. They would be interested to know what you did at your previous job, technical related, for example, and they would like to get a feel as whether you are honest on what you've done, what you've said. So still prepare to talk technical when you're meeting with human resource manager. When you are meeting with a hiring manager or peers, you could expect larger proportion of the questions to be technical related. However, they may also want to get to know you as a person and whether you will be a good fit to the team. So the recommendation here is to get a good night's sleep before the interview and try to give a great first impression and let them know you are a team player. You could find many general interview questions online. I would recommend mock answer those questions. You could ask your friends and family to randomly ask you those questions. You can even record yourself or even go to the extent of record yourself and replay your response and see where you can improve. One tip to prepare for the general question, this is to pick 5 or more strengths that you have and focus your response on those strengths that obviously you truly possess when preparing for general question, or actually prepare those strengths to for your entire interview, because they are what you believe that will make you stand out over other candidates. For example, If your strength is that you are a fast learner and good at learning new system, this is a strength that add value to the team and the company. Thinking your strength ahead could help answer questions related to tell us your greatest strength, or tell us 3 of your strength, or why do you think we should hire you instead of other candidates? Another important question frequently get asked during interview is the weakness questions. Sometimes you will be asked to share even 3 to 5 of your weaknesses. Know that interviewers are not really looking for a perfect candidate. Everyone has flaws. I mean, normal people have flaws. What the interviewers are generally looking for is that whether you're someone truthful and is aware of your own weaknesses. More importantly, are you actively trying to make yourself better and taking action to improve upon your weaknesses? That's the reason I do not recommend telling interviewers that your weakness is that you are a perfectionist, or you work too hard, you work too many long hours. I mean, I believe there are people who are perfectionists. If that's the case, let the interviewers know that you, being the perfectionist, did harm your work in the past. For example, because you're a perfectionist, you always want to make sure your files are perfect, and that had got into a way of completing work on time. So show them if you have learned the lessons from being late due to you wanting to be perfect all the time, and what have you done, or what have you actively doing to try improve upon this weakness. So be honest and sincere. Since we're talking about weakness and past mistakes, I believe it's good time to start thinking of the next style of interview question, which is behavioral question. So the famous form of those type of questions taking phrase like, tell me a time when something happened and how did you deal with it. The slides listed a few examples of behavioral questions. For example, tell me a time when you had to deal with conflicts and how did you react to it? Tell me a time when you had to manage tight deadline, what did you do? Tell me a time when you had to when you have to be a leader and how did you handle the issue? Tell me a time when you had to work in a team environment, what happened? And a few of the other ones. You could find more behavioral questions online. The key tip I would like to offer here is to think through your past experience and prepare to speak to those questions ahead prior to the interview. You do not necessarily need to think of one experience for every question here. Sometimes one past experience story could answer several of those questions. For instance, to deal with difficult client that had a conflict with you, you could have solved the problem by working in a team and utilized your communication skills. So in this example, we're talking about dealing with conflict, talking with a client, solving problem by working in a team, and applying your communication skills. For another example, we can say a leadership opportunity could come at a time when you have to manage a stressful deadline in a team environment, and you can see there's several behavioral questions being answered in the same story here. So one story could serve as to answer many questions as long as you do some preparation and practice to speak on your past experience before the interview. Moreover, you could practice using the STAR method to organize your answer. Not sure, maybe some of you have heard of the STAR method before, but STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. Take the behavioral questions as tell me a time when you had to lead a team to meet a tight deadline and what did you do as an example. First, you could describe the situation and make sure you don't talk in circle. That's very important. And spend too much time on explaining the background story because I know we all have that tendency, me included. In fact, I recommend giving yourself a 5 minutes limit to finish the entire answer. So maybe you only assign 1 minute to the situation. You could talk about what difficult did you face, how did you react to the situation. The result could be both positive and negative. If it was positive result, did you receive recognition? If it was negative, did you learn anything and use that lessons to your future work? Prepare for creative questions could be at a different level and could be more difficult because we don't really know what questions will be asked. Creative questions simply don't seem to relate to your past work experience. If you're not a creative person, like myself, I'm not a creative person. Don't panic. It is better actually to understand why hiring parties ask those questions. It is likely that interviewers want to know how you think rather than necessarily looking for a right or wrong answer. What is your ability to handle pressure? How do you deal with failure? Your ability to reason and organize your thought are what they are looking for. Organizing your thought is important in this case, and I have a tip to offer in this case. For example, putting your answers in orders could really help. List firstly, secondly, or thirdly. You could also answer the questions in A, B, C format or any other like organized formats. And that don't be afraid to ask for a moment and think through the question. The last but definitely not the least that need to be addressed and prepared prior to an in-person interview is questions to ask the interviewers. As mentioned when we talked about the research phase, make sure you have at least 10 questions prepared prior to any in-person interview. So we talk about in the research phase to do the research and draw down everything that you are interested in, and then that could help you to prepare questions. And I recommend preparing for at least 10 questions prior to any interviews, and after you have done the research through the research phase. Because after you've done the research phase, it would not be hard to come up with 10 questions. For example, if during the research phase, you find out that the company had recently took on a major project, you could ask questions related to that project. If you are interested in environmental impact and read a related new article about the company's effort to become an environmental friendly organization, you could ask more questions related to the company's other environmental effort. If you are interested in the culture of the company, maybe you could ask culture related questions. Or after you have read the company's mission and vision statements, and you would like to explore more on the company's action to achieve those mission and vision statements. I am very confident that you will be able to find at least 10 questions during the research phase, and it is recommended to properly document them and ask during the interview to show the company that you have done research and you have indeed you are interested in the company and the position. I personally think asking thoughtful question is actually extremely important during the entire interview process. It not only shows your interest in the job, more importantly, it gives the interviewers an opportunity to share their expectation for what they're looking for in a successful candidate. It could also help you to come up with topics to mention in the thank you letter. If you had the opportunity to being hired by the organization, asking the right questions during the interview process could help you succeed even potentially in your probation period. And just make sure that you listen effectively at the interview. During the interview, when you ask the question with nod and smile, if it helps you remember, I recommend taking notes on the interviewer's answer. Another side note, during the entire interview, make sure you always make eye contact, especially don't ignore the interviewers who are not participating in answering questions or asking questions. You want to show them that you still know they're there, and so just look at them once in a while. By the way, some of you may agree with me on preparing questions, but think 10 questions are way too much. The reason I mentioned 10 is because it is very likely that some of the questions you have would naturally being answered during the interview process, be it part of the hiring manager's normal routine, or you just happened to have the opportunity to ask questions during the interview. However, having 10 or more questions prepared ahead of time almost guaranteed that you would have some questions left at the end of the interview. And this gives, that gives a good last impression. Well, in-person interviews, I know, could be very nerve-wracking. However, with enough preparation done ahead of time, I guarantee that you will walk into your next interview with more confidence. This is the end of our session today. Let me know if you have any questions that relate to today's topic. Thank you very much. And I'll hand that back to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Janie. We're gonna start taking questions. If you can type your questions into the questions tab, that would be great. We will not be looking at the chat. So the first question, all right, so please keep your questions related to the webinar today. And we'll start taking questions now. Okay, so how can we research on finding like which HR or hiring manager could be the interviewer? So because there could be like, I guess, different people interviewing them, or they don't know which, if it's gonna be the HR manager or just the hiring manager. How can we find this out?
Okay, so this is a very good question. I did mention in the presentation that normally you have a contact prior to the in-person interview. So your first point of contact would definitely be the person that arranged your in-person interview. For example, you could have a phone interview prior to the in-person interview. In that case, you could reach up to that person asking for who will be interviewing you in the next stage. And if it's very rare that they would say they would not giving you that information. And once you get that person's name and department and some other information, you could look them up on LinkedIn or on Google, doing anything you could to look for their information.
Thank you. Next question is, how would you answer a question like, why do you think you're a great fit for this job?
This is a question that would actually relate to our beginning of the presentation, talking about coming up with 5 or more of your strengths in the beginning of preparing for your interview. Because once you know your strength, that's naturally your answer for this type of questions. Because you would just giving them the strengths you have, and then you think those strengths would make you a better candidate and a better fit for the position.
Thank you. Could you kind of just give a general answer on how to approach the question about weaknesses?
So going back to our session today, the weaknesses question, first of all, I really encourage everyone to be sincere and be honest and think about what you have as weakness for like for real. And then the hiring managers are not looking for a perfect candidate. They want to know that you know your true weaknesses. And then if this is a weakness that you actually actively trying to improve, for example, if you say, again, using our example of you want to make sure all your documents are formatted properly and to a point that you miss the deadline. So this is a true weakness that you share with them, and something, especially something happened in the past. What have you done since then? For example, you realize that you have to prioritize when the deadline is really tight, and then sometimes you have to prioritize accuracy of the numbers versus the formatting of the table. So tell them what you have done and what you're actively doing to improve upon your weaknesses.
Thank you. And when you're researching a company before you go in for an interview, what should you focus on? Like the news or like new ventures, change in leadership? Like what should you focus on so you can talk about it in the interview?
There are many things you could talk about regarding the questions you want to come up with, but I generally suggest that look into the areas that most interest in you, because when you talk about something you're interested, the true self could actually come out, and then they would know you're not only just asking the question for the sake of asking the question, but you are truly interested in the company, you're truly interested in the topic. There are general guidelines as to what kind of question to ask. For example, if you have some questions for the company, then it's most likely you ask those questions to the HR personnel. And if you have questions related to technical or the structure of the team, you ask those questions the managers or your potential peers personnel and the HR person, as well as the manager or the peer.
Thank you, Janie. Next question is, when you have to ask questions after an interview, is it okay to ask about career growth within the company, or would that be like something frowned upon if you ask a question like that?
Encourage you to ask the career growth and the development programs about how you can grow inside of the organization, because that shows you're someone who always want to improve yourself, and then you want to let's say climb the career ladder, and they know someone who wanted to develop them further is likely to perform better. So that's definitely something you could ask.
Thank you, Janie. And if you're asked about salary expectations, how should you tackle that question?
So I guess the general, everybody would know that try not to bring that topic up in the beginning of the interview. And also my suggestion is not to mention about it like ever by yourself. You always wait until the other parties mention about the topic, and even then you don't want to be the first to give out a range and give out a specific number. That you always want the other party to tell them what they are willing to offer and what their expectation is, because this is essentially a negotiation. Who give in first, who lose.
Yeah, and then as Jenny mentioned that you need to research everything about the company and the role, so that's something you should do in your research to know, what the standard salary range would be in that type of role in that company. So you should already have an idea what to expect.
Exactly.
And Jenny, could you like mention a few things to avoid during an interview?
Um, one of the things is make sure you're always truthful. If you are,
Mhm.
if you're not an expert in certain area, don't say you are because that could backfire. Because even if you mention that to a hiring manager, the hiring manager may know something about the area and they could ask you a technical question. And if you don't have the answer right away, that could definitely backfire and then lower your trustworthy score. And another thing is sometimes you may meet up with more than one interviewers at a time, and then only one person maybe ask you a question, and the other person maybe just sit there and then either just look at you or they would probably write down something, but they may not actually say a thing during the entire interview process. But don't ignore them. Try to encourage them to join the conversation by asking them specifically a question that if you ask a culture related question, for example, you could ask the person who's talking with you, and what about this person? For example, John, how about John? What do you think about what would you like about the company? So make sure you involve them and don't ignore them.
Thank you. And taking notes during an interview, is it rude to do something like that, or is it okay to take notes during an interview?
I strongly recommend taking notes in the interview because it that's just my personal opinion, because when you're in the interview, you could get nervous and sometimes you would talk and the interviewers could ask you questions and you could not, you probably don't really process the question properly. So if you actually brought a pen or pad into the interview and you wrote down the question, and that could help you organize your thought. And also that shows that the interviewer that you're taking down their answer. And then later on, you could use your pad as the background information to form your thank you letter, and then pick up something that actually was mentioned in the interview in your thank you letter, and that kind of increase the relevancy of the conversation and bring back more memories.
Thank you. And is it okay um, to call the person who's interviewing you by their first name?
Yes. So actually, mostly I think the Canadian culture is that when we're introducing ourselves, it's really rarely that we would say, my name is something, Mr. or Mrs. And they always say, oh, hi, I am Janie, for example, and I expect you to call me my first name. That's just my experience, and I think it's fine to definitely call the person's first name.
Thank you. Okay, so the weakness question, a lot of people seem confused about that. So I'm going to answer that. A lot of people are saying, should I say this is my weakness? This is my weakness. It's not like that. The weakness question is to see what you have recognized, what you need improvement on, and how you are working towards improving yourself in that area. So it could be something like, oh, well, my previous job never really required me to use Excel as much, but I realized that that is a skill that I will be using in the future. So I'm looking into taking some quick Excel courses to do better and to learn more. That was a weakness. So weakness can't be something like, oh, I can't do math, or I'm too sensitive. These are not weaknesses you want to mention during an interview. So it has to be something that you're working towards making better, and it's an area of an improvement, not necessarily a weakness per se. So don't get confused with the word weakness. It's not an actual weakness. So I hope that
Yes.
answers a lot of the questions that are being asked right now. Um, at what point should you bring up religious requirements during an interview?
Sorry, what is, so,
I guess like requiring time to pray uh, during work hours. So everyone has a break. That is your time that you can use to step away and, you know, if you want to pray or whatever it is. So that break is for, and I think a lot of places have like 2 or 3 15-minute breaks, an hour break. So you can use, you know, delegate your time wisely according to how you'd like to go ahead and go forward with that. Next question here is, I'm just going through questions and we've already answered a few, so they're similar here. Okay, so everyone, if you can keep your questions short, I'm sorry because they're so long and we've already answered them. So I'm just going to, okay, how do you tackle the question about having a gap in your resume? It could be maybe because you were on mat leave or maybe you were away taking care of a family member. How would you explain that gap in employment?
the gap in the employment is, so first of all, if it is if you're taking day off to taking care of the baby, if you're taking day off to take care of the family member, those are what you could mention in interview, and I think interviewers would understand. The importance here is to show that that you're continuing improving on yourself while you're on those the gap, you're on the leave. So because you can really create untrue stories about why you're having this gap. So it's the recommendation is to be honest and tell them what you've done during this gap.
Thank you. So when during an interview, are they mostly technical questions, behavioral questions being asked, or do they also ask technical questions related to the job as well?
So basically, when you are having an interview with a human resource person, their job, it would focus on trying to understand you as a person, make sure you're a good culture fit, and you are someone who meets the qualifications specified by the hiring manager. So they are less likely to ask you detailed technical questions. But once you are having an in-person interview with the hiring manager, or for example, your potential future boss, or if your potential future peer, they would definitely ask you technical questions. So a larger proportion of interview with them would be about technical, but then they would still be interested in you as a person. So you do still have to prepare for behavioral and general questions when you're meeting with the technical people.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the weakness question again because I'm getting all sorts of questions here. Like, should you mention that because of your child, you weren't able to spend time at work? No, that is not something that you will mention at all. Please do not talk about your children or your personal lives and how that affects your work. Like I mentioned, please, I'm going to say it again. Please, it needs to be something, it's an area for improvement that you are planning on working on making better. It should not have anything to do with your personal lives. It has to be something, it could even be something a little bit academic, but mostly related to your job or role or company work related. So I hope that really helps answer your questions because I'm seeing a lot of um, questions about that. All right, so when is a good time to send a thank you email after an interview?
Um, I would say that, so if you are having an interview in the morning, send out your thank you letter no later than end of the day in the same day, because you want to make sure the memory of the interviewers about you is still fresh while sending out the thank you letter.
Yep, thank you. And what do you do if you don't have an answer or you can't think of an answer to a question?
Well, if you can't think about the answer for a question, it's okay to say that I'm sorry, I have a brain freeze right now. I couldn't really think of anything right now. Maybe we can go back to the question later and then just naturally move on to the next one. Hopefully you don't have many of those in the interview, but one or two, it's acceptable, because you better say it this way than trying to mumble jumble a bunch of nonsense.
Thank you. What's the difference between, like, is there a difference between video interviewing and in-person interview? Like, is it an advantage?
Yes. So the reason that companies always wanted to meet you in person by the end, even though they could properly talk to you through the phone, because they want to see you as how do you present yourself in front of real people. And then people like to see whether you could be a good a culture fit when they actually see you, that whether that I would say chemistry, with that the fit actually exists between you and the team. So yes, in-person interview is different than a phone interview in that sense.
Thank you. And how would you explain if you were laid off or terminated, or you quit?
So first of all, you definitely want to be honest, and you want to tell them the truth. So if it's a restructuring, that's why you got laid off, then make sure this you always shine a positive light of the last termination. For example, I actually was working with my mentee on this question recently, and she had a change of career a couple years ago, and we were working on her resume, and she was asking how should she answer this question. So first of all, I was asking her what she thinks she should say. So she was saying that the reason she changed her career was because she there's too many, she has to spend too much hours working on her last career. I was like, no, but then the new career, the finance job you're going into, that you went into, doesn't necessarily mean less hours or less work. So eventually we came up like with the real reason why she left her previous career was because she no longer believes in what her previous companies and the previous careers doing. It was not really benefiting the society, and it was not really benefiting the general public. That's why she left. And that was a great answer for this type of question, because it actually showed the company that the reason you left was ethical, and you're an ethical person.
Thank you. And how do you handle something like related to being overqualified? So let's say they'll say, well, you had such a senior position back home. Why are you applying for like 2 positions lower? How can you tackle that question?
Well, so this is more related to the fact that you can talk about the procedures and then standards in the back home is likely different than the local Canadian companies looking for. And then you always wanted to apply your old practice into a new company, but you understand also that may not be so easy as you don't really know the local practice, and that taking a position 2 levels below could really help you and benefit you when gaining that local experience. And that could be where it's like could be like a stepping stone, but essentially you do want to move up and then become be able to apply your true knowledge.
Thank you. And I think that I've answered that one too. All right, so it looks like we've answered all of our questions. Thank you, Janie. Do you want to add anything before I move forward to my announcements?
I mean, in the end, I know interviewing, like especially in-person interviews, could be very nerve-wracking, and by preparing ahead of time, and especially if you're preparing starting from the resume stage, could really help you kind of increase your confidence level and prepare you to face any questions that interviewers would ask you. And I strongly recommend everyone doing that. Thank you.